Welcome to Don't Fear the Wait podcast with your host Vicky Masita, bringing together science and personal experience.
Hi guys, welcome back to the next episode of the Don't Fear the Wait podcast with me, your intelligent-looking Tiny Titan host, Vicky Masita. I'm obviously only messing about with that side of things. It's just that my guest today, Chris Peil, has said you are looking very intelligent in your glasses. So I don't know whether that's flattery or whether he's taking the piss out of the fact that I look like Dame Edna, realistically. However, moving swiftly on, I'm going to introduce my guest. He is Mr. Chris Peil. Chris, hello, good afternoon, good evening. That was a quick day, wasn't it? How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Good. So for people who don't know who you are, Chris, because I actually think you're not very well known in the industry at this moment in time. So let's start shouting your name about. Tell us a little bit about yourself, why I've asked you to come onto the podcast, and yeah, your background, really.
Okay, so I've been vaguely involved in the fitness industry I've worked in the fitness industry since 2002. So I've been around a little while, but back then, of course, you couldn't just be on Instagram and be a superstar the next day. So you actually had to put some time in. So I've done a few different things. And when I present, I talk about four things, really. I talk about your own personal experience, your education background in the area that you work in, what you've done with clients, and then if you're going to teach, your teaching competency. Because to me, if you talk about competency and why other people should basically give a shit what you've got to say, it's more than one dimension. So I don't particularly like the whole I'm from the University of Life, but I've done this and this, or I've got this PhD, but have you ever worked with anybody? So I think, before anyone should give a shit, you should have covered those sort of four areas. So for me, in terms of my own personal experiences, I pretty much got into the industry because I was a big fat kid, and it was initially just going, I'm not fat, I'm strong. And then it's like, oh no, actually, if I go to a serious gym, I'm not strong and I'm still fat. So now I've got to actually deal with that. So it's kind of like a recreational bodybuilding background, but that sort of went full circle for me. So I did that for a while, in fact for quite a long while. I got round to sort of being able to see my abs and thinking, I'm pretty good at this and everything there is to know about this. And in like 2007, I started working in a gym and I got the big this is Dunning-Kruger effect, isn't it? Where you come across somebody and you're like, whoa, all this shit I knew nothing about. I was confident and now I'm not confident anymore. And one of the things, this guy was from an NASM background. So he'd worked with David Lloyd and he'd done a lot of things on, I suppose, corrective exercise was what they were calling it then. And a lot of it now you'd look at and think, that's a bit hokey, or the research has gone past that now and they're suggesting some of that maybe isn't the way we would go. But at the time, it was brilliant for me because it opened my eyes massively. And then I got more into trying to work out what gave me the best bang per buck in terms of what actually helped me perform well, as opposed to just be purely about aesthetics. And then I wanted to do some strength stuff. And then it turned out I wasn't very strong. So I was reasonably good. For a fat kid, I had quite a big engine. So I did some more endurance-based stuff, but I still liked lifting. And I went and did a kettlebell course, and somebody said to me, there's sport lifting kettlebells. I was like, really? Okay. And then they showed me what it was. I thought, well, that's ludicrous. And then at one point, I got a job where I was actually working away a little bit. And of course, you can take kettlebells with you. So I started doing that. In terms of being an athlete, that's the best I've done. So I actually got a world silver medal in 2014 for lifting kettlebells.
Wicked.
Make me an amazing athlete, because obviously that's a weird fringe sport. And the weirder and more fringe it is, the less talented you've actually got to be to do well, as long as you apply yourself. But what I would say is, in terms of personal experience, it's that whole thing of having to actually apply yourself and having to do something that's repetitive, do it to the point that it hurts you, because repetitive things will basically always do that. You have to create overload to get an adaptation. So you go to create the overload at some point, when you don't get the judgment right, hurts you. I did that, got hurt, had to deal with my own problems, had to apply myself, had to get past that. So again, it doesn't think it makes you a superstar, but it does give me some of my own frame of reference, not just being an armchair athlete. I've done a novice strongman show, which was for a bet really. I've done some ollie lifting, I've competed as an ollie lifter, although I'm just not strong enough. Done some indoor rowing, played about with a few things. So I've done some real training and can relate to training. In terms of education. My first degree was actually in accounting and finance, so that's not relevant. Just coming to the end of a master's in sports medicine, and sort of in between, I did a lot of industry-related things, which was enough with then the industry experience to get onto that master's. So that'll finish sort of August. For me, that was what I identified across those 4 areas, my big weakness. So I thought, well, what can I do about it? Managed to get somebody to let me onto a master's course, and touch wood, that's gone pretty well. So that's that. In terms of working with people, I was up in Scotland for a bit, and pretty much had a full book working with clients doing what you consider to be sort of rehab and prehab type work. And I'd had some pretty good success with people, non-athletes, talking about 50-year-old lady, been scheduled for a neck operation, and essentially what we did with her rehab-wise and prehab-wise meant from between being scheduled to actually going for the pre-op, we then decided that the condition had improved so much that she wouldn't need the operation.
Oh, brilliant.
We did that, rehabbed with a lady who had been a scuba instructor and then had an industrial accident and actually fractured some vertebrae, rehabbed her back to being strong enough to carry scuba tanks again. These kinds of things. A lot of people I was working with who otherwise wouldn't exercise, and that was pretty much my niche, and that sort of developed over time. And then I started seeing a lady who was competing as a strongwoman, and she was training out of Strength Asylum in Stoke-on-Trent, which obviously I all trained, and effectively ended up working with enough different people and getting some success with them, strength athletes, in terms of trying to rehab injuries and then trying to minimise the risks, that I eventually ended up doing some work with him. And obviously that from there got me some exposure with other strength athletes. So since I've worked with Zydrunas Spickus, worked with Lauren Charlet, worked with on the ladies' side, Lisa Yates, worked with 4 of the top 9 finishers at Britain's Strongest Woman, England's Strongest Woman last weekend. So the top 3 across each section were obviously the top 9, and I'd worked with, I think I had 4 or 5 of those overall. So I've done quite a lot with quite a range of strength athletes. A little bit with bodybuilders, done some work with Ant Bales, done some work with a guy called Lucas Gabris, who is pushing on towards pro status. So yeah, actually the more forward-thinking strength athletes are really receptive to this kind of thing. So I'd like to think a reasonable CV on that front. And then finally we're talking about teaching competency. So I'd actually worked as a trainer assessor for 2 of the biggest training companies in the UK for personal training. Won an award in 2010 for my education delivery, qualified as an assessor and a tutor, and you'd be amazed how many companies are selling education in the UK who don't have any qualified tutors at all. Have mentors, which is nonsense because these guys are the only contact you have. So in effect, they're not your mentor, they're your tutor, and they're not qualified to do so, they're not competent to do so. It's completely deregulated, it's crazy stuff. So yeah, I do actually have some competency for teaching as well. I personally think those 4 areas are quite important, and it's probably a bit boring this aspect, but I would suggest to anyone who's looking for education that they would actually effectively interview who they're going to learn with, and try and find out across those 4 areas, that person's own experience, that person's educational background, that person's competency and success with clients, and that person's education competency. If they're weak across one, definitely if they're weak across a couple of those areas, why are you learning from them? What do they to offer you? They need to be sorting themselves out and their own experiences and their own CV before they're in a position to work with you. So yeah, in the last couple of years, I've relocated from Scotland to Stoke-on-Trent, which is my wife's fault, my now wife's fault, and I'm actually teaching my own program, which is that's the stuff that's under the brand of the Move Well Project, and that's working with personal trainers predominantly to try and close what I call like the rehabilitation gap. So you've got this mentality, and it's easy if you think about sports teams. In sports teams, you've got your physio, and people who are on the injured list see the physio, and then when they're signed off the injured list by the physio, they go and work with the conditions.
Yeah.
Now, the more advanced sports teams are getting much better at trying to integrate that process. and they're trying to grey those areas so that the rehab guys, the therapists, are then doing some rehab with them, and the conditions are understanding the rehab side much better, and are also doing rehab work with them, and there's a smooth transition from when they were injured, so to speak, to being fit. Because essentially, the guy who worked at Man United came and spoke to us, called Dave Fever, who was he was their head of physio, head of medicine when they won the treble, and he said he considers everyone to be injured on the squad. It's whether they're symptomatic or not, or whether they're injured to the point that they can't compete or not. Not that somebody who is not on the injured list doesn't need treatment. They all needed treatment, be it proactive or reactive.
Right.
So what I'm sort of trying to do in the private sector is look at, okay, well, actually, every physio I know works out of an office. You are not doing rehab in an office. So in the UK, we don't do rehab. We do treatment. And once somebody can basically, when somebody can wipe their own arse and walk out of the office, that's it, you're done. Certainly when you look at funding, so if you look at like the NHS side of things, I won't knock the NHS, I think it's absolutely brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant for things that are a priority. So if you walk into A&E holding your other arm in one arm, they're going to prioritise you and you're going to get treatment fast and you'll get looked after. If you go in and you've sprained your wrist, you're going to sit and wait a long time. That's how casualty works. It's the same on the therapy side. If you've got a real significant need and it's impeding you in a big way in terms of your quality of life, you'll get prioritised. As soon as you get to the point that somebody else is more of a priority for that space than you will be discharged. Well, that point is a long, long way away from the point where your movement health, your musculoskeletal health, is in a place you can actually function well, avoid re-injury, and actually improve your overall health and fitness. So we've got this issue where people aren't happy at the point that they're then left alone, or they're left alone and they are happy, they're sort of acutely pain-free, but as soon as they start trying to push the boundaries at all, if they want to get more active, they get hurt again. And realistically, the best people to deal with this aren't therapists, and they don't work out of an office. If we have the right skill set, they're personal trainers who work out of the gym, can actually do that rehabilitation. And crucially, rehab should just meld into what you consider to be prehab, where we actually proactively try and stop people doing things that are more likely to injure them. To be fair, a lot of this stuff can be done. There's all the fashionable fallout at the minute in the industry, but there is quite a lot of evidence showing what injury risk factors are. So quite simply, there's things we can do that reduce injury risk factors or moderate those as we're training people. So why don't personal trainers know what they are when they study?
Very true.
So we cover that in the program that I run. We do cover that. That's part of it.
Right, fantastic. So let's get into the nitty gritty of it then. Obviously, you were saying that it's really important for people to be aware of prehab movements in order to prevent injury. Now, as bodybuilders and powerlifters and even powerful athletes, like maybe squash players who are like stop-starting, that kind of thing, what's some of the most common things that you see when people come to you? Because obviously I know that us both have got a working relationship at the moment because I've got some issues that are predominantly affecting my hip. So is there something that you can kind of see as a reoccurring theme that you could go over and identify what these people should be looking for?
I mean, that's the thing. There are a lot of reoccurring themes across sort of modern living, and there's probably a lot of reasons for that, and they'll be sort of multifactorial. I am a big believer that it involves sort of individual assessment to do well, because otherwise, the car analogy is the best one. So if you think, if you've got a problem with your tyres not wearing right, you can get the tyres changed. But you would get the tracking looked at, because otherwise, a month later, you'll be back getting your new tyres changed again, because they've worn unevenly again.
For sure. But that happens to me all the time.
If you've got a knocking noise coming from one of the wheels, you go. Now, don't get me wrong, if your tyres are worn badly as well, they'll change the tyres.
Yeah.
You'll want to know what the knocking noise is. And you'll want them to actually identify what it is and address that thing. You won't want them to address that thing on all four wheels, because it's not knocking on all four wheels, it's knocking on one. And the time, energy, expense of changing it on all four wheels doesn't make any sense. So if you think in terms of the investment that we're putting in, sort of rehab, prehab wise, again, it's a time investment. It's the only thing we've got that's finite. So you can't just do everything. And actually, at times, doing everything wouldn't help anyway, because you're not improving balance that way. Really, a lot of it does come down to balance. So you've got a bit of a sort of yin and yang thing going on, where you need active range of motion to get into the positions you need to be able to get into. Now, obviously, they're different if you're a squash player, you're a powerlifter, or you're a weightlifter, or you're a strongman. There's some commonalities in terms of joint ranges you need to have. In terms of what's loaded where, there's some, and how heavily loaded it is, and how quickly, and all those things. There's obviously the variations. So that changed things a bit. But what you do tend to find is that a lot of people will lose the same range of motion over time, and a lot of people will then have to compensate from somewhere else in order to get into something that appears to be the right overall movement. So, for example, if you've lost ankle range and you're going to squat, squatting involves you not falling over, basically. So you need to get your femur parallel to the ground, pretty much, and you need to do it without falling over forwards or backwards. So if you can't get enough of your body weight forward of the midline of your foot, as you go down, you will fall over backwards. So if your ankles aren't doing what you want them to, and you can't get your knees far enough forward, that means you're losing some of the weight that should be forward to the centre line. So you compensate for that by getting more of your upper body forward over the centre line, which either means you collapse forward and you do some sort of bastardised squat morning. Now, actually, as we sort of talked about today, if that means you run out of range in hip flexion, it'll involve your arm and your back. So somebody can stand next to you forever in a day saying to you, keep your chest up, keep your back flat, whatever. But there's a structural conflict there. You literally cannot do that and not fall over.
Yeah.
You need to address the area that's an issue. So you need to identify the area that's an issue. And that's obviously just one example. And stability and control and mobility are related and to an extent opposed. So the more mobile you've got a joint, the more range you've got around that joint. It doesn't have to be less stable. But intrinsically, to an extent, as you get towards the end ranges of that joint, it'll often be in a mechanically weaker position. And you need muscular control, stability, and then strength in that position if you're going to load it heavily. And again, depending on the individual, what they need, that's where the assessment comes in to do that. It's pretty much, you've got a bit of it's a bit of a yin-yang type relationship between, if you don't have particularly good ability to lengthen muscles, you probably have if you're very inflexible, you probably do have a greater risk of muscle tear. The evidence on that's a bit murky, really, because again, it's multifactorial. But essentially, it appears that you're more likely to tear a muscle if it doesn't have very good extensibility, it's not very flexible, and then you would tear it under an eccentric load as you get towards the end of its normal length, and it's asked to be loaded eccentrically, then it will be at great risk of tearing. So the likelihood is we're at greater muscle tear risk if we're not very flexible.
Sure.
If you're dead flexible, and this was the old yoga idea, and you won't get injured when you're dead flexible, well, that's a load of crap as well, because actually if you get really flexible with no stability at those end ranges, you can take a joint, you can get it close to its end range where it runs out of sort of ligamentous range. You've got no muscle there functioning there, stabilizing it. You rest on the ligaments, you get ligament joint damage instead of muscle problems. So it's like...
Sorry, go on, carry on. I'll ask you in a minute.
It's almost like you get one or the other in that instance. So the only way to really deal with that is to get balance, where you've got good ranges for what you need to achieve, and you've got the ability to activate the muscles you need to and stabilize the joints in those all the way through those ranges you've got.
Right.
Sounds a bit airy-fairy and conceptual, but hopefully that sort of makes sense to anyone.
Yeah, it does. And to be perfectly honest as well, what's really interesting about that, by saying if you are very, very flexible, you won't get injured, what I find interesting about that is about what happens to people who have hyperflexibility syndrome or double joints or something like that. Because I've had a number of clients come to me who literally just need to get stronger. Their muscle needs to get stronger and bigger because of the simple fact that they do have this hyperflexibility and their joints are really too mobile. So that's going to cause even more injury.
Hypermobility is a really interesting one because the instances I've come across that again. If you test ranges for most people who are hypermobile, again, they don't. Okay, so there's some. I've got to be careful here because obviously you're talking about like a medically diagnosed condition, so that's beyond scope for us.
Sure.
If they have been diagnosed with that, and that's what we're working with, then that's cool. So the few people I've dealt with, and it is a few, with this, some people actually present without great joint ranges. It's almost like the joint laxity is then compensated for by muscle overactivity. I have seen that, and that then causes some other issues. But generally, what you come across, and that's what you're talking about, is actually they've got mad ranges, they can do anything, and they're not stable enough.
Correct. But then overstretching it is bad for hypermobility, right? So you can't actually actively stretch it.
This is where, when you assess, you should be doing your assessments, and actually, if you basically do simple range of motion assessments and they've got everything that they want and possibly more, you wouldn't be giving them those stretches to do. And this is what it comes down to in terms of having that understanding of why we assess, why we don't just go, oh, I saw this show on YouTube. If you've got hip pain, try this. It's like there's a fucking million reasons you might have hip pain. That's one. You might make this worse. Don't do that. Get some competent advice.
Yeah.
If you think with hypermobility, the biggest problems I've come across is imbalance with it. So if somebody's got very, very good mobility in like most ranges, and then they've got one that's poor, because they are so mobile, they can compensate for that. So the example I'm thinking of is a guy who had absolutely phenomenal ranges everywhere, competing in strongman, and he had slightly limited, and it was only slightly limited, better than your average, but slightly limited hip extension.
Okay.
He had problems because he got around that. He could do everything, but he got around that using hip abduction, hip rotation, things like that, which threw his hip joint into end ranges, really, really far into its end ranges, if you like, in those ranges. And actually what he did need to do was almost nothing elsewhere, but do a little bit of work to improve, sagittal hip extension, just straightforward hip extension. And that actually cleared up his hip problems.
Wow.
So his intervention was like really short and really easy to do because there's very little. And then you see people who might actually present with the same actual symptoms who are completely different because they actually need all sorts of different things in order to get, they've literally just got very poor ranges. See, generally, you'll often find, this is a generalisation, but you'll often find the bit where you get the pain, and I've got an example of this, is the bit that is working. So you're getting to that end range because you have that end range, and then that hurts. It's the bit where you're not getting any range that's being compensated for where you've got the problem. So the example I use for this is if your job, let's see if we can get this on here, if your job is to sit in a factory every day, pick something up from the production line, put it up there, you pick it up, you put it up there, you pick it up, you put it up there, you pick it up, you put it up there, and everything's fine and dandy. Unless you get an overuse injury because it's repetitive, which is possible, realistically everything's fine and dandy. So in this example, we just assume it's all good. You go and play rugby and you get hit on the shoulder and you get a bit of inflammation in your shoulder, and for a while you've not got all that shoulder range. So your body's dead clever and it adapts, and what it does is as you pick it up, your shoulder doesn't move very much, but now your back does.
Right.
Do that for a few days, your back's sore. You know your back, you hurt your shoulder. But if you go and have treatment, you'll go and have treatment and go, oh, my back's sore. Somebody will rub your back because we're good at that. We like rubbing stuff. You go somewhere, they'll rub your back with no further assessment, nothing. Now that might be exactly what you need at that point, because if you've got to the point where you've now acutely injured your back, you might actually need some treatment, or some treatment might feel good, even if it's only placebo and there's nothing wrong with that, and that helps and that's fine. But the underlying cause is still the shoulder in that example. And you can imagine this could happen all over the body. And unless you actually then treat the shoulder might be giving you no pain because the shoulder's protectively reduced its range of motion, and your brain stopped asking you to use that, and it's just everywhere else is giving you bother. It might not. the same injury might lead to somebody else having problems around the shoulder. That one's easy because they go, this one hurts, and somebody deals with it. That makes sense. So ideally, conceptually, for what I do, you have a good look holistically across the whole body, because there are things, obviously, everything affects everything else. We're not very good at it as a society because we want a quick fix right now. We want that thing to stop hurting. Again, it can be quite a hard sell with clients unless they've already been through a lot of things and they're actually a sort of last chance saloon, at which point they tend to be a bit more open-minded.
For sure. It's funny, isn't it, as well, because you can also look at things by saying, like, your back might be affected by your shoulder, and then your right hip might be coming from your left ankle or something like that. But it's very, very interesting to do all of that. Now, have you ever used, this is just an interesting point and just something that came into my head as well, have you ever used something like a placebo effect and seen that to work? Like, it's difficult to get buy-in, isn't it, from somebody who says, I've had this shoulder pain for such a long time, and actually it's your hips that you're working on. So it's like, you need to work on your hips in order to sort out the shoulder pain, because it's obviously affecting your back, and that's affecting your shoulder, and it's more like a big domino effect. But would you work on their hips and then still do them a little bit of a massage on the shoulder for the placebo effect, or almost like to placate the client?
To be fair, I try not to be that person who will try and magically identify this is the cause, because everything tends to be multifactorial anyway. If it's an acute issue and you can put your finger on when you did it, that's acute. That is that thing. That did that. That caused that. Often, even then, there'll be an underlying chronic issue, and it'll be acute on chronic. Certainly, if it was an acute injury that was non-contact. So if you have a contact injury playing sport, somebody smashes you in the face and that breaks your face, that's pretty obvious. That broke your face.
Yeah.
But if you're running along and you have an acute injury and it's either a muscle tear or a joint issue, and nobody had collided with you, you were just trying to avoid something, then it's probably got a chronic, for want of a better term, and this is a controversial term, but like a chronic dysfunction underlying anyway.
Yeah.
Whether or not you intervene with that before it causes a problem, that's a difficult one. That's a judgment call. But I try not to be the person who goes, it's this. Because actually, for most people, you find there's got loads of intertwined things happening, and they are all intertwined. And you don't necessarily want to try and pick out one as if you're some sort of magic guy. You want to try and generally improve things. So I tend not to do that. And normally, if they have got a problem with the shoulder, like say you would be doing something around there anyway, but you would also want to look elsewhere. That can lead to some difficulties where, for some people, where there's quite a lot going on, you would end up giving them loads of stuff to do. And if you give them loads of stuff to do, for some people, that's too much.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to meet people at the level that they're at, and I think that's kind of what you're getting at. You need to meet them at the point that they understand and they're happy with to get that buy-in. The other thing is, I'm quite sure that the vast majority of people, in fact, all of us, not the vast majority, everyone, all of us who do anything that's sort of vaguely therapy or rehab related are getting loads of placebo effect all the time. And again, that's not a bad thing. It doesn't make you a snake oil salesman. It doesn't make you a con man. If what you're doing has got some sort of sound reasoning and sound evidence behind it, I don't see that as a problem. I'm quite sure a lot of people will feel a bit better just because they're doing something proactive. And obviously, there's all that evidence showing you that actually probably is how your brain works, that you think more positive things, you have more positive feelings. All the pain science stuff that links in, there's massive area on its own in sort of pain science research. And yeah, you probably have a better experience in terms of your own pain if you feel that you're taking control of it and ownership of it and you're doing something positive. So
yeah, definitely.
That is all intertwined, so there's no issue with it. I have had the conversation with people about how a lot of my own sort of intervention stuff, if you like, there's a program I've designed and I obviously believe in. I've not actually done it myself probably in about 4 or 5 months now, because my training that I'm doing at the moment, a lot of which is a lot of bodyweight stuff at the moment, is exploring a lot of those ranges whilst I'm doing it. So the fact that I had them in the first place, I'm retaining most of those and not having to do any sort of direct interventions to maintain that. And I think if you're doing that on a regular basis, quite often, that's fine. Where I would disagree and differ from the way the current swing in fashion, and there's always swinging one way or another, isn't it? In the fitness industry, is the people giving it you don't need to do any direct intervention. Everything you can do just by repatterning neurally and blah blah blah. It's like, well, actually, if somebody doesn't move very easily in that way, and there's something you can do in isolation that helps them do that and buys you that window of opportunity to do that, that's a better overall strategy. And people just get zealous about their belief. And your belief doesn't matter. What matters is the client and their belief, their feeling, their experience. And if it helps them get to where they need to be, then brilliant. As long as you're not doing anything that's massively unethical or wrong. So, examples of that would be if you get a placebo effect, and you wouldn't know it. Obviously, there's no way to know anyway. If you got a placebo effect from rubbing somebody's shoulder and then asked them to move in a way that was more positive for their overall movement health, would reduce inflammation from there, and they can then do that, surely that is better than not doing the thing that you think is giving them a placebo effect only, and them not having the confidence to do the intervention that actually does help. That to me doesn't make any sense. Massage is the one, basically. Massage in itself, I don't think there's any real solid, credible evidence that massage really does a whole lot of anything in terms of a healing effect. Say that, every single, like we said earlier, every single Tour de France team has massage therapists travel with them.
Yeah.
There is certainly evidence that pressure work, pressure, covers a lot of things. Gives you an immediate increase in range of motion. If it gives you an immediate increase in range of motion, and that allows you to move in a way that is has less compensatory factors and generally balances things out, is less likely to cause you inflammation and problems in the future. Great, because you can then pattern that, you can then learn to do that, and like myself, you might end up at the point where you don't have to do as much of the intervention. If you start with it and actually get those ranges back in isolation, you've got a much better chance of getting to that point than if you don't do it at all.
I mean, there is a big difference, isn't there, between massage and myofascial release and using, more pressure in a specific point, but even for a shorter period of time. Like what we talked about earlier on was I have a difficulty in getting my hips displayed to the point where I can pull in a pseudo position. So what you actually worked on with myself was actually rubbing a pressure point on the ball of my foot. Now, that's got absolutely nothing to do with my hip, but it did have something to do with my Achilles tendon. And it was almost like an immediate release. Now, yes, okay, we only got maybe a couple of centimetres more out of it, but it was a couple of centimetres more than I did before the ball pressure. And that you didn't rub my foot, you didn't give me a nice foot massage, although it might have been nice. But I did obviously stand on a ball and have a bit more of a pinpointed pressure. And it was quite a forceful pressure as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, so again, this is one of the problems that we get when people fall out on the internet, is that if they're not defining exactly what they're doing and they're using fairly general terms, then other people can take umbrage with that and disagree with what they're doing, when actually they probably don't disagree. It's just a semantic thing. So depending who you see and what type of a massage you're going for and what different techniques will be included. So like in layman's terms, most people who know nothing about the industry, if they went for a massage, they would assume that all massage therapists can do massage and do the same thing. Whereas obviously we know that some people do like Swedish massage or holistic massage or whatever else and don't do sports massage, or some people do deep tissue massage but doesn't do sports massage, and there's a differentiation between those two things, even though there might be some crossover. So I do and utilise and teach some trigger point work. Again, in itself, massively controversial. I don't care. And this whole thing about it's dead controversial. Do they even exist? What are they? How does this work? Blah blah. Well, what we do know, and I can refer you to the evidence for this, is as I said, you can apply a significant amount of pressure in some areas and get an immediate change in active range of motion. And that's what we're using it for. It then becomes a tool. To allow us to use that range of motion to do something that's got a greater long-term effect. So yeah, you make a good point. It depends on what you're defining as massage and what you're using it for. To be honest, if somebody just wants to go and get rubbed at it and it gives us relaxation and makes them feel better, again, if that psychological effect helps them sleep better and get better recovery, yeah, cool, great. Who are we to be dicks about it and go, there's no evidence that says...
Yeah.
The current trend to be the coolest kid on the block because you quote evidence. My current online nemesis, she's a complete moron, is the lady who goes on and on about evidence, yet She has no qualifications whatsoever that demonstrate she has any sort of peer-agreed competency to read, interpret, or apply research. So if you go off and do a master's, you spend most of your time basically doing that. And I found that quite an eye-opener, quite a challenge, certainly at first. And you spend a lot of time reading the research. You've got a nutrition master's, don't you?
Yeah.
Presumably you did the same thing on that. Loads of reading, loads of lit reviews, loads of having to critically analyse it, write it up. Somebody else who's been there, done it before you, got the t-shirt from one of these institutions, basically judges your ability to do that. And then somebody else reviews their review of you doing that. And basically your peers in that world decide whether you can do that or not. Now,
honestly, some of the educational things at the moment, they do strike me as ridiculous, just like you were saying that. Obviously, I'm a qualified nurse as well, and I had to do a degree in my nursing. Do you know you spent more time learning how to write an essay than actually learning how to care for people? And this is what strikes me as ridiculous in the industry, and especially like you were saying, you cannot just be evidence-based. You've got to have a mixture of both.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this lady, what pisses me off with her is I'm not that person who says, I 100% think that side of things, because most of the people who are academics aren't great practitioners and aren't lecturers, because you can't, there's a finite amount of time, and you can spend it with all your time in the lab or all it with clients or a bit of both, but you make a compromise somewhere. So the guys who spend all the time in the lab aren't spending as much time in the real world, and vice versa. That's just fact. That's how it is. So I don't think it's the be all and end all, and I think the way research has evolved into the system that it is now, I think a lot of it's pure bullshit. And the reason why is there's a piece of research coming out that I've been party to because it's at the university that I'm at. They've done it on knee osteoarthritis. So obviously that's of interest to me because it's musculoskeletal. And what they did is they braced people's knees into what they consider to be a better position, lower risk for osteoarthritis. And 80% of people's osteoarthritis improved. And then they found that after a while, that repatterned the way they walked, took the brakes off, and they walked in a better position, and they had less pain. For that 80% of people, absolutely fantastic, brilliant. Probably delays how long it is before they need a knee replacement. Then it'll delay, obviously, how long it is before that knee replacement fails, saves everyone a load of money and a load of pain, and everyone's happy, woohoo, great. Well, it is, except what about the 20% of people who it didn't help? 5% of that 20% didn't, well, it's actually 25% of those, but 5% of that overall 100% didn't get any better or any worse. 15% got worse. Is that okay? Well, I would say not. As a clinician, I would say that's not okay. As a researcher, of course that's okay. So then they looked at, and this was presented to me as if it was fucking groundbreaking. We looked at what's the subgroups, what made those people not respond? And that was actually a question. And I immediately, because this is what I do, went, well, I'm pretty sure that the people who won't have responded won't have been able to walk in the range that you wanted to jam them into with your brace. So either they didn't have the hip range or didn't have the ankle ranges, or both, most likely, to walk in the way you now wanted them to. And the professor, and he is a professor, so he is a time-served professor, was actually, and it's quite, I felt good about this, was quite shocked that I knew that from working in the fucking real world.
Yeah.
And he was like, and then he was like, well, yeah, so you've kind of ruined my big reveal now, and tell me about the subgroups that they had. I looked at it, and they've got, after years and years and years of research, they've got 3 fucking subgroups.
Yeah.
So the standard test that I teach to level 3 PTs, some of whom literally got it off a Kellogg's packet, has got, I can't even remember off the top of my head, I'd have to go through it. There might be in total 25 different yes-no answers in the overall assessment. So it's only about 20 minutes to do, but 25 different yes-no answers. Now, if you put that into a, whatever it is, a program to find out how many combinations there are, it is something mad like, I have done this, I should remember the stats, but it's something stupid like 250 different subgroups. So I've got like 250 different subgroups in my assessment, and they're talking about 3. I'm not saying that I know more than them, not at all. What I am saying is that I know from working with people in the real world that the devil is in the detail with those individual things. So we test for everything, and we give them the individual intervention. And what the same as everything else. For 80% of people, 80% of the program will probably look the same. But those outliers, well, still quite a big number of people who would otherwise be fucked. But it's no shock then, is it, that I end up with those people and working with them when they've gone through the system? Because what I did find on the course is, because I'm from an unconventional background, that's a massive weakness in some areas, a massive weakness, because effectively self-taught, you've put together your own competency in the areas you wanted by doing different little courses here and there, and your own research and whatever else. Which means all the stuff you were interested in, you went off and did. The things you didn't give a shit about, you didn't do. So that's a problem. So you go into a master's program and they make you do what they want. So you have to learn the stuff that you didn't want to know about, but you still have to learn it to a good level because you want to get a good grade. So that's the strength of that. Well, the strength of being effectively self-educated is you sit there and all the physios on the course all think the same. All the doctors on the course all think the same. Because they've been conditioned to think in that way. So actually, without being a dick, they don't think. They do not think. They are conditioned. So actually, one of the big strengths of being self-educated in that regard was actually thinking on my own about, well, these are problems I've come across, how do I solve the problems? And this, what we talked about earlier on the competency thing, didn't make me more competent then. Absolutely not. I was massively behind on the traditional education route. So that's why, instead of just being a dick about it and going, oh, I'm going to be passive-aggressive and say that you don't need that, I'm going to fill that gap, which I'm doing. This lady that I'm falling out with on a regular basis online, she wants to hide behind the research and tell everyone that she knows best about the research all the time. Well, if you believe that strongly in that system, how the fuck are you not qualified by that system and endorsed by that system? You can't have it both ways. You either believe in that so strongly you need to have the masters or maybe even a PhD before you can lord it over everyone else, or you don't believe in it that much. Choose one, get into that camp and see it through. Otherwise, just stop being a dick online.
Yeah.
Like, pretty much, you've got these guys who are following the fashion because they've drunk the Kool-Aid and they're going, right, okay, I do this. This is my intervention. I found the solution nobody else has found. You probably haven't, have you? Let's be honest. You haven't found the solution nobody else has found. What you're doing is probably of value, but it might be more value if you took a little bit from all these other areas as well. So at the minute, one of the things that I'm really engaged with is that the mechanical side's fun. The mechanical risk factors, yeah, that's great, because as we saw with the stuff that we did today, we don't have to tell you to change your behaviour, and nobody likes behaviour change. So you don't have to do much that different. You probably warm up anyway. Your warm-up changes a little bit. On your down day, where you probably want to do something that's a bit of activity anyway, you're going to do a bit of activity that sort of helps with this sort of prehab idea. So your overall behaviour change, how much time you spend in the gym, what you actually do, doesn't really change fast enough. So it's not very challenging in a psychological sense. So everyone enjoys that. The other thing, when you get to injury risk factors, basically comes down to, you could argue a lot of it is down to programming. How much load you use, intensity, volume, how it sits with your recovery. So no matter how well you move, I'll tell you where this came from. This came from working with a strength guy, where we did loads of mechanical stuff with him. And he'd had a load of problems before, and he used to do all sorts of mad shit, like you'd be squatting and you'd ping an adductor. You don't really want to ping an adductor squatting because one, it hurts, and two, it's not the prime mover. Why was your adductor taking all that load? Why was your adductor overloaded? It's probably a mechanical problem. He had a lot of mechanical problems, so we did some stuff that improved his mechanics, so to speak. Again, just saying that would upset a load of people. But probably improved the balance overall of the demands and reduced his risk of getting injury in one area. Then, in a comp, when he was going for max number of reps, a heavyweight, we're talking like 265 for max reps, on the 12th or 13th rep, he tore his quad.
Oof.
Well, that is the prime mover. So that isn't really a mechanical problem, is it?
No, not at all.
So the problem then is, are you conditioned enough to do that event? So this comes down to the idea of you need to get conditioned enough to cope with the sport you're going to participate in. But your training in order to get conditioned enough needs to at no point get to the point that injures you, which means you have to build that up at a rate that you can adapt to without getting injured, which pretty much is the principles of programming. But these principles of programming that are based on general adaptation syndrome, where you get stress, you recover, you adapt, all work on this completely nominal concept that, we think people systemically recover in, from a heavy session, you might recover centrally CNS-wise in 72 hours.
Yeah.
The localized area, that's I suppose up for debate. So you want to arrange your training so that you're maximally stressing the system only once every 3 days, but you're stressing things often enough that you get continued adaptation, all these different factors. But they're all still based on this nominal idea that this is what happens. But what about actually tracking what the organism, so the athlete, is telling us? If we can actually get decent data from them in terms of their physiological signs, we might be able to say in advance, are they actually overreaching way before the point on their program when we might want them to overreach? Are they at risk? And when you start thinking about it, it gets stronger and stronger as a concept, because you'll see guys who are pair of training partners where one will get stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger, get to the comp and do really well and win the comp. And the other one, following the same training program, with the same progressions and everything written down on fucking paper, gets stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger, and then gets injured. Because they're not recovering at the same rate as the other person for a myriad of reasons, potentially. So as the other person recovers, adapts, gets stronger, they don't quite reach recovery, train again, which actually puts them further in the hole. The next training session, the other person recovers, adapts, gets stronger. They haven't recovered from the last one. They're further in the hole. They put themselves further in the hole again. How many times do you think we can do that before something goes ping?
Yeah.
So actually what we want to be doing is say, right, we write out on paper what your program is, in theory, but actually, if you're always recovering on time, cool, we can just keep pressing on. If you're not, we can see that before it happens and maybe start adapting and pulling some of the sessions back a little bit. And when you've written down you're going to do sets of 5 at your 85% of your all 1 rep max, well, that all 1 rep max was presumably on quite a good day because it was your fucking max. So 85% of your 1 rep max on a good day, on a shit day when you're not recovered, where you've written 85% down, it's not 85% anymore, is it? It's 95% that day because you're tired, you're fatigued. You're going to attempt to do sets of 5 with 95% of your all 1 rep max. It's no massive surprise that you get hurt at that point. Well, people tend to like that argument a little bit less because that does involve modifying your behaviour, and it involves either looking, or both, involves looking at your training and whether the superhero program you downloaded is actually appropriate to you or not, or whether you need to modify your lifestyle in terms of your diet, your hydration, your sleep, things that are actually going to have a big factor in how well recovered you are, your overall stress levels in life.
Definitely.
It's one of the things why people want to train like Eddie. But Ed was a full-time athlete. Ed was sponsored and had plenty of food to eat. Ed could sleep during the day, most days, get his naps in. Ed built himself a hyperbaric chamber in his shed and spent time in it under high pressure and high oxygen. Ed did a lot of things for recovery that your average lifter ain't going to do. So you download his training program and see how long that takes to break you, because it will.
About 2 weeks.
The other thing is, we were having a laugh about this the other day. I was in the gym with two of his two guys who've trained with him over the years, and I haven't known him that long. So they were talking about some of the old guys who trained with him, and actually, all I've seen is that everybody got massively stronger and put a shitload of weight on until they broke.
Yeah.
And he broke everyone.
Yeah.
He got to win because he was basically the last to break. That actually has a lot in common with like the Bulgarian weightlifting system, say. So if you're in a state-sponsored Eastern Bloc regime and they just bring to you for your weightlifting team the people who've tested in school as having the great, I believe this is what they did. I'm not certain, but I'm led to believe this is what happened. In the Eastern Bloc, communist era, what they did was they tested kids and they said, right, this is your muscle fiber types, this is your, they did biopsies. and they tested kids, and they decided what sport they would be gifted for. And they've got somebody who's genetically gifted for this. They draft them into the system. You get all these gifted kids. You give them a program that will get a gold medal, or they break one or the other. They either win a gold medal if they survive, or they break.
Yeah.
Well, that's great if you've got that system and you're trying to build the best athletes, so you don't give a shit if you hurt them. If you're a slightly fat 35-year-old man like me, downloading that program is not great because you don't want to get broken. You want to do the best you can do with what you've got. So actually, in that sense, listening to your own body is the way forward. Unfortunately, listening to your own body is also a complete headfuck, because are you giving yourself a break? Are you pushing yourself too hard? Well, get some actual measures. Then you don't have to do that. So one of the guys I've been sort of piloting this with, great athlete and lovely guy, we've had it where there's days where I've said to him, actually, you should probably bring it down a little bit today and work at the bottom end of your range. So do the session, but bring it down a little bit. And there's other days where he's gone, I feel a bit tired. And we've looked through his markers and gone, no, you bob on, mate. You actually need to man up today and get on with it. So it worked both ways. And I don't think it's an infallible system by any means. I do think there's you're better having some information than none.
Absolutely.
Trying to make an informed decision than not. And I think it's probably one of the areas we can really develop as a little sector of the industry is, do you know what, if you play for a Premier League football club, when you turn up in the morning, they'll do this, they'll take some of your blood, they'll look at some markers, they'll do all this for you, they'll try and identify if you're going to get ill before you get ill. They're probably going to make you train anyway, but they might give you a bit of a break. We could be doing that, and we could be offering that in the private sector. Basically, the only way for you to make progress faster, creating stress isn't very difficult. Creating the appropriate amount is more difficult, but even then, that's not that difficult. What is difficult is recovering and knowing when you're ready to go again, when you've adapted. So if we can effectively supercharge recovery, if you recover faster and harder, overall, you progress faster and you get injured less.
Yeah.
So really, for me, the big growth area, recovery is where it's at.
Definitely.
Mechanics is important, but recovery is king. And I would honestly argue that that's what was the difference maker for Ed. Again, it's multifactorial. The things he can do psychologically are just completely off the chain. His behaviours are amazing. His application, his dedication, his intellect. He's a phenomenally inspiring character. But when he applied all those things, he did his research in terms of recovery, and he made sure that was where it needed to be. And that I really think was, the difference maker, that meant he could tolerate the kind of programming. He could physically tolerate the kind of programming that gets you to a half-ton deadlift. Other guys, if you saw on that day, Jerry Pritchett tore his hamstring.
Yeah, exactly.
So
it's one of those that you've really, really got to optimise your mobility, your prehab, your rehab, and obviously get all of your ducks lined in a row for your recovery capabilities as well, especially if you want to shift some heavy weights and be a really good performance athlete as well. So, Chris, that was absolutely phenomenal. You just kind of reeled off everything that was a really nice conversation there as well, in terms of the mobility project as well, and the movement project that you do. So before we leave, would you be able to tell us where we can find a little bit more about you, where we can follow your work, and for anybody to get in touch with you, should they need to move better?
Well, this is the stuff I'm rubbish at. My Facebook page is the best place. So it's the Move Well Project on Facebook. So 4 words, the Move Well Project. Forwards. Contact me through the page, and on the events section is where I put the stuff about the program. It is independently recognised already. The main thing, if you're a fitness professional, is that I have a partner insurer who will then insure you to work with a range of clients you can't on your standard PT insurance. So people who've got mechanical joint pain, mechanical back pain, non-specific muscle pain, chronic pain. Pain, it's very difficult to get insurance to work with people who are in pain. It's very few programs will allow you to advertise to people who are in pain, and this one will, and you will be insured to do so. So that's quite a big deal. It opens up a whole other sector for you. It's not massively expensive, and it is supervised for an entire year, so you get an awful lot for your money on it. I really just want more people doing it, so we can grow this understanding in the UK that rehab is a thing. Rehabilitation isn't treatment. It comes after the treatment on the spectrum, but rehab is a real thing and it flows into prehab, and we can actually look after people and reduce the number of injuries. Or, to be honest, we're probably not going to reduce the number of injuries. What we're likely to do with athletes is get them to a much higher level before we run into these problems. That's one of the other ones. But with normal people, we certainly should reduce the number of injuries. Because if you think normal people, they're not looking to break records.
Yeah.
They actually shouldn't be getting the injuries in the gym that they are. You know, as an industry, I'm going to go on a little bit again now, but as an industry, we're terrible because we give them a massive increase in volume when they first come in, massive increase in the amount of overall work we do, and then we're surprised when we hurt them in the first 6 weeks.
Exactly right. Things that we need to consider. So what I'll do is I will put all of the links in the comments section underneath the YouTube video, guys. So if you do want to get in touch with Chris at any point, just to ask him some questions, scratch his head, make him do something along those lines that, you know, makes him kerfuffled, you know, try and catch him out. It'd be a nice one. I try to do that all the time. But anyway, if you've got any questions for Chris, any questions for myself, then obviously please ask away and we will get back to you as soon as possible. That is it from me, it's it from Chris, and it's it from Don't Fear the Weight again for this week. So Chris, once again, thank you very much for your time today. And guys, I shall catch you on the next episode.